The Dutch Gold Coast expedition of 1869 to 1870 followed the resistance of the local Fante people surrounding the forts assigned to the Netherlands in the 1868 forts trade along the Gold Coast with Britain to Dutch rule. Although the Dutch managed to eventually control the situation, the events marked the end of Dutch involvement in the Gold Coast. Without a profit for almost a century, the escalation finally made the political balance shift in favor of the liberal faction, which wanted to sell the colony to Britain, and away from the nationalist faction, which wanted to retain the colony for reasons of national prestige. On March 5, 1867, the convention between Great Britain and the Netherlands for an interchange of territory on the Gold Coast of Africa was signed, which stipulated that all forts on the Gold Coast to the east of Elmina were to be handed over to Britain, while all forts to west of the town were to be handed over to the Netherlands. This meant that the formerly British forts at Bien, British name, Fort Apollonia, New Dutch name, Fort Willem III, Dix Cove, British name, Fort Dix Cove, New Dutch name, Fort Mennelandscruis, Comenda, British name, Fort Comenda, same in Dutch, and Secondi, British name, Fort Secondi, same in Dutch, were to become Dutch. To this effect, the Dutch steamship Het Mennelandscruis departed from the Dutch harbor at Texel on November 6, 1867, arriving in the Gold Coast on November 26 of the same year. To give effect to the treaty, the ship first departed to Accra, to hand over Fort Crevecoeur to the British. Afterwards, the ship sailed to Elmina. The other Dutch forts were handed over by officers. Then, the ship sailed to Dix Cove to assist in the transfer of Fort Mennelandscruis to the Dutch. Both this transfer and the transfer of Fort Apollonia were without problems. Things changed when the ship set sail for Comenda. The Dutch flag was not raised there, as the local rulers resisted the handing over of the fort, which was not much more than a ruin, to the Dutch. At Secondi, all went more or less according to plan, leaving the Dutch with only one fort to resist their rule. Joint Anglo-Dutch negotiations with the locals did not bear fruit, and when the local king finally approved the handover, he was deposed later the same day. Dutch forces then entered the fort by force, and on February 2, 1868, Het Mennelandscruis left for Elmina, leaving 20 soldiers behind to keep the peace. Skirmishes ensued throughout February, but at the end of the month peace seemed to have returned. Matters took a turn for the worse on May 26, 1869, 12 days after the arrival of the new governor Cornelis Natglas, when several Dutch able seamen from the warship Amstel, which had taken over the duties of Het Mennelandscruis, were taken hostage by the people of Comenda. One of the hostages was killed, while the rest were kept prisoner in the village of Kwasi in the interior. British negotiators managed to buy the hostages out for 15,000 Dutch guilders of ransom, but the public outcry in the Netherlands over the affair was so great that the minister felt obliged to send a military expedition to chastise the people of Comenda and Kwasi. Yet another warship, the Vice Admiral Koopman, was sent to the Gold Coast to punish Comenda. An expeditionary force of 9 officers, 18 European soldiers, and 17 Africans was then assembled in Elmina, and the King of Ikwafo joined in with a force of 32 Africans and 80 coolies. In December 1869 and January 1870, this force laid the villages of Comenda, Anima, and Kwasi in ashes. The inhabitants of those villages mostly fled to Cape Coast. The Dutch government instituted the Medal for Courage and Loyalty Guinea 1869/1870 for 7 native soldiers that were deemed to have fought courageously during the expedition.